What is not a bullet you dodged, but a huge tactical nuke you dodged? It was around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night in October when I woke up with this weird chest pain. I'd been sleeping pretty soundly when this uncomfortable pressure started building in my chest, kind of like someone was sitting on it. At first I thought maybe I'd slept in a weird position or had indigestion from dinner, but the pain wasn't going away and seemed to be getting worse. I nudged my wife Sarah awake and told her what was happening. She immediately got that worried look on her face and asked if I thought it might be a heart attack. I was only 48 years old and had always been relatively healthy, so the idea seemed pretty far-fetched to me. But the pain was definitely real and wasn't something I'd experienced before. Sarah insisted that we shouldn't take any chances, especially given that her father had died of a heart attack in his early 50s. Our daughter Emma was staying with us that week during her college break, so we woke her up and explained that we were heading to the emergency room just to be safe. Emma offered to drive us, which was probably smart since both Sarah and I were pretty anxious. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital was relatively quiet for a Tuesday night. We checked in and explained the situation to the triage nurse, who took my vital signs and asked me to describe the chest pain. I told her it felt like pressure and tightness, but it wasn't the crushing pain you always hear about with heart attacks. She seemed pretty calm about the whole thing and said they'd run some tests to rule out any cardiac issues. After about 30 minutes in the waiting room, they called me back to one of the examination rooms. The nurse who took us back, Janet, was this experienced woman who'd probably been working in emergency rooms for decades. She was joined by a younger nurse named Michelle, who was apparently pretty new and seemed to be shadowing Janet for training purposes. Janet explained that they were going to run an EKG to check my heart rhythm and make sure everything looked normal. She said this was standard procedure for anyone who came in with chest pain, and that most of the time these tests came back completely normal. I was actually hoping the chest pain would come back while they were monitoring me, not because I wanted something to be wrong, but because I wanted to figure out what was causing the discomfort. They hooked me up to all the monitoring equipment and started running the EKG. I could see the screen from where I was lying and was watching the lines and patterns, though I had no idea what any of it meant. Janet and Michelle were both watching the monitor as well, and I noticed them exchange a look that didn't seem reassuring. The test finished, and Janet said they needed to run it again to make sure they got a clean reading. During the second test, I saw something flashing on the screen that made both nurses stop what they were doing and stare at the monitor. Janet told Michelle to stay with me and Sarah while she went out to the nurses' station. Michelle tried to keep the conversation light, but I could tell something had changed. A minute later, Janet came back and very politely asked Sarah and Emma to return to the waiting room. She said the doctor needed to examine me, and they'd update everyone shortly. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Within about 30 seconds, 5 or 6 medical professionals had quietly entered my room and started preparing various equipment. Dr. Rodriguez, the attending physician, introduced himself and explained that the EKG had shown I was actually having a heart attack at that very moment. He said there was a significant blockage in one of my coronary arteries, and they needed to perform an emergency procedure to clear it and place a stent. Everything happened incredibly quickly after that. They started an IV, gave me medications, and began prepping me for the cardiac catheterization procedure. I remember thinking how surreal it was that I had come to the ER thinking I was probably overreacting to some minor chest discomfort, and suddenly I was being wheeled into surgery for a heart attack. The procedure itself took about 2 hours. Dr. Rodriguez and his team inserted a catheter through my wrist, navigated it to the blocked artery, and placed a stent to keep the artery open. I was awake during most of it, which was both fascinating and terrifying. When I woke up in the cardiac recovery unit, Dr. Rodriguez came by to check on me. He said the procedure had gone perfectly, and the stent was working well. Then he said something that really put the whole situation in perspective. You probably picked the best time and place to have a heart attack, right here in the emergency room. He explained that if I had ignored the chest pain and stayed home, or if the heart attack had happened while I was driving or at work, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The fact that I was already in the hospital with cardiac monitoring equipment and a full medical team available had probably saved my life. One slightly embarrassing detail that Dr. Rodriguez mentioned was that when they do these procedures, they can access the heart through either the wrist or through the groin area. A male nurse named Kevin had to prep both areas just in case they needed the groin access point. Fortunately, the wrist entry worked fine, and we avoided that particular awkwardness. I spent 3 days in the hospital and have been on cardiac medications ever since. The whole experience completely changed how I think about health and paying attention to warning signs.